How did the Ukrainian armed forces help St. Petersburg confirm its status as the capital of drone technology right during Putin's economic forum? He threatened to tear NATO apart like a rag doll, but something went wrong. The corvette Boyki has quieted down significantly after a slap in the face from Ukrainian drones. But why was this ship so important for the Russian Federation? The first footage of the testing of the FP-7 ballistic missile from the Ukrainian company Firepoint has appeared online. How soon will we have Ukrainian patriots? The NATO Secretary General has arrived in Kyiv. What is Ukraine negotiating with the North Atlantic Alliance? It's about this and more. Let's talk about it right now. And don't forget to like this episode to expand our viewing audience. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about the new results of long-range sanctions by the defense forces on targets deep within the Russian Federation. He confirmed the strike on the St. Petersburg oil terminal 1,100 kilometers away, and the strike on military targets at the Russian naval base in Kronstadt. And the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine recalled that the struck oil terminal is one of the largest transshipment complexes for petroleum products in the Baltic region, and it plays an important role in ensuring the export and logistics of the Russian Federation's fuel resources. The terminal's capacity, according to the General Staff, is 10 million tons per year. The facility is involved in meeting the needs of the aggressor state's military formations. Also, operators of the first separate center of the unmanned systems forces struck the corvette Boyki in the Velishchinsky dry dock in Kronstadt. The video of the strike was released by the commander of the AFU unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdi, known as Magyar. The footage shows the sequential striking of the ship by two FP-1 type drones. The Boyki, built in 2011, was commissioned into the Russian Baltic Fleet in 2013. It is a carrier of guided missile weaponry. Since February 26th, the corvette has been undergoing scheduled repairs. The strike on this corvette in Kronstadt could have long-term consequences for the Russian Federation. After all, it's not just about damage to the ship itself, but also about the possible blocking of the Baltic Fleet's repair facilities. Let me remind you that the Boyki had a history of wandering along NATO borders and escorted the Russian shadow oil fleet, and Putin's propaganda loudly promoted it as a nightmare for the countries of the North Atlantic Alliance. Well, only the Kremlin propagandists forgot to warn the Ukrainian drones about it. So the Boyki is unlikely to show itself again because if the damage proves critical, restoring the ship could take years or become economically unfeasible. A turning point is gradually occurring on the front in favor of the armed forces of Ukraine. Russia is losing record amounts of territory. Putin hasn't had such a failure since 2023. See all the details in the report by our journalists.
They aren't occupying but losing seized territories. In the last week of May, according to the independent source Deep State, the Russian army lost 20 square kilometers. During the final months of spring, the Russian military seized a total of only 20 square kilometers. This is the worst result since October 2023, when the Russian army captured only 8 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory in a month. Brigadier General, Commander of the 3rd Army Corps, Andrei Beletsky, is certain that the AFU is currently in its best position since the start of the full-scale invasion.
I believe that right now the best trend is the reduction in personnel losses, almost reaching zero loss of territory, and even the recovery of some areas. It is a very debatable question who is on the offensive, Ukraine or Russia, and there's been no progress for months. If the dynamics continue as they are now, in 3 months the Russians will be in a worse position, both on the battlefield and regarding deep strikes.
There is a resource that is essentially a kind of counterpart to the Ukrainian mapping service Deep State, a pro-Russian resource called Creamy Caprice. It's notable because they often show a more optimistic assessment than the consensus among many analysts. That is, they mark territories as under Russian control where stormtroopers with flags have just appeared, but it's actually still a gray zone. So even according to their data, by more optimistic estimates, it turns out that May is ending with almost a negative figure for Russia's advancement.
The current situation at the front could become a turning point. The Russian army has no success on the battlefield, while the AFU has regained the advantage in drones and created conditions for a potential exit from positional warfare, states the American Institute for the Study of War.
Open-source data on Russian combat operations indicates that the nature of the war is shifting in favor of Ukrainian forces, at least for now. The pace of the Russian advance is stagnating, while Ukrainian forces are using new tactics and operational concepts in an attempt to break out of positional warfare. However, it is still too early to say whether Ukrainian forces will successfully restore maneuverability on the battlefield.
The spring offensive has basically stalled. It has stalled. Well, as a result, Putin has only one tool left in his hands, and that strikes on civilian targets, mostly, after all, on civilian targets they strike as a result of, well, first of all, the low accuracy of Russian ballistic missiles, which are the most dangerous weapons, these Zircons, Iskanders, and so on. Their accuracy is not great.
If June is the same as May, it's a very clear sign that in terms of the war, things have turned bad for the Russian army. And the pace, it has dropped almost to zero in those months when there should be maximum breakthroughs.
Simultaneously with the failure at the front, the training level of some military personnel in the Russian Federation is falling. Also, there are fewer people who want to sign a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. By the end of 2025, the recruitment rate for the occupation army had dropped by 1.5 times.
In total, for 2025, 363,900 people signed a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. This is 10% less than in 2024. Back then, up to 407,000 people could receive payments for signing a contract. At the beginning of 2026, the recruitment rate also continued to decline, according to Janis Klug, a researcher at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. According to his estimate, in the first quarter of 2026, 800 to 1,000 people signed contracts every day, 20% less than in the same period last year.
The failure of the spring offensive and the leveling of the front, the increase in the number of Ukrainian armed forces strikes on occupied territories, and the decrease in the recruitment rate for the Russian army due to a lack of money and the reluctance of Russians to die in Ukraine. All this suggests that in the perspective of a few months, Ukraine is capable of turning the tide of the war in its favor. The first footage of the testing of the FP-7 ballistic missile from the Ukrainian company Firepoint has appeared online. The company's chief technical officer, Irina Terek, reported that an important test was conducted recently, a fully controlled maneuverable flight of the FP-7 missile, which will form the basis of the future Freya anti-ballistic interceptor. Every successful test of a new missile is a step toward our technological sovereignty. After all, our true independence is determined, among other things, by whether we are capable of creating critical technologies on our own, whether we are capable of making strategic decisions regardless of others' political cycles, production, or priorities, emphasized the director of Firepoint. Well, on the eve, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte arrived for a visit to Ukraine. According to the Secretary General's official representative, he is accompanied by ambassadors from the alliance's member countries. She pointed out that this is a visit of the entire North Atlantic Council, NATO's highest political decision-making body, which usually meets at the ambassadorial level at least once a week. For security reasons, NATO representatives did not comment on the exact program of the visit. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha reported on social network X that Rutte will hold talks with the country's President Volodymyr Zelensky and other important meetings. Putin's mouthpiece, Peskov, has already reacted to the visit of Ukrainian drones to St. Petersburg. He, without a shadow of a doubt, stated that the special military operation was started precisely to prevent such strikes. Well, the insane have their own special logic. Meanwhile, Russians themselves are posting such videos of the St. Petersburg air defense in action online with bitter irony.
I don't know what they're trying to do with the weapon. No way you're hitting that.
Holy shit, he said it's loud as hell.
Authorities in St. Petersburg claim they shot down 50 drones this way. Locals write, maybe joking, maybe not, that real air defenses will arrive Friday with Putin. Still, foreign guests like these are arriving for the Russian dictator's so-called economic forum. In St. Petersburg, they can enjoy the hazy view of the local oil terminal burning. Well, perhaps some will find the scent of the Russian fatherland sweet and pleasant. At the forum, local inventors proudly show off their impressive achievements, such as this truly unique and innovative robot soccer team, which represents an exciting vision of what the future might look like in robotics and sports. Take a look. Oh, well, give it a try. Go on. Well, it seems Russia has its own ball wizard, and we haven't even seen those two in action yet. They must have the day off. They're having a blast in occupied Crimea too. Road trips without any gas, seawater and sand full of oil, constant air raids, and to top it all off, a ban on boat trips near the villas of Putin's friends. This holiday season on the Black Sea promises to be truly unforgettable for Russians.
Miles of traffic jams, walking under the scorching southern sun, and the Black Sea full of oil slicks. These aren't the only attractions for Russian tourists daring to vacation in Crimea this summer. For now, the main challenge is just reaching the occupied peninsula.
See, they're taking two. How much are they?
Huh?
800 rubles for this one. Well, how will you mow?
In Crimea?
I'll find it. There's no gas in Crimea. Let's get some.
We don't need any.
Everyone's filling up canisters like this to take with them to Crimea, so they don't have to worry about gas once they're there. We're in Crimea now, no lines, but there's a limit, 20 liters of 87. And they have 98. That's it, no 91.
Then you have to find a few liters of fuel at the insane price of 300 rubles a liter. Local drivers are stuck in miles of traffic for several hours. They start lining up at night. The gas situation in Crimea is like this. Citizens who travel to Crimea for vacation in their own cars should be aware that they risk possibly having to leave this place on foot rather than being able to drive back home as they had planned.
It's just a total zombie apocalypse. Holy shit. I don't even know how to put it. Here, well... Metal depot. And this is Vesta, over there on 9th of May Street. There are lines like this at every gas station, even longer ones.
Yevpatoria 8 in the morning, they started pumping gas since about 6 at 2 stations. And today we have a line like this, roughly 2 kilometers at one station and another 2 kilometers at the second station. Resellers are selling gas for 200, 250, 300 rubles per liter, which really hits the wallet, of course. But it is what it is. And yeah, if you're planning to come from the mainland via the Crimean Bridge, you can bring 100 liters of fuel with you, no problem. So keep in mind, if you're planning to visit us, bring along 5 canisters, fill up before the bridge, and you'll be able to drive around just fine.
Local authorities are appealing to citizens' consciences, asking them not to drain the last golden liters of gas in Crimea, and they also promise to solve the problem, though how they'll do it remains a secret. This is how a fuel truck burns, one that tried to make its way to Crimea from the mainland through the newly Russian-occupied Ukrainian territories.
Whoa, man, it's hot. A fuel truck just now in Primorsk.
Owners of rail tankers aren't eager to provide them because no one will insure them. There were 3 rail ferries. They all got... A new one is expected sometime closer to September, and there's a shortage of sailors for these ferries. The rail pier is blocked. The wait for car ferries is up to 5 days. Driving fuel trucks through the new territories is just... No one wants to do it since these are civilian drivers and they won't go even for 100,000 per trip, not even for 2. On the peninsula itself, there are almost no private owners willing to store fuel because everything is being attacked repeatedly. Insurance companies won't cover it.
But if there's a shortage of oil products in some places, there's an excess in others. On social media, Crimeans and visitors are posting videos from the peninsula's beaches.
No, nothing is happening. Everything is going according to plan. Everything is going to plan, nothing is happening. Look. A pebble. Yeah, you get it, right? Actually, there's fuel oil here.
No, fuel oil is coming out here. I just decided to go down to the promenade in Koktebel. I went down walking on the beach just like this on the sand. Then I looked, and right here, well, on this toe...
Where is that? Where is that?
In Koktebel.
In Koktebel?
Yes. and I see something brown. I thought, okay, so I shook it. I thought it's not shaking off. With my hand like this, whoops, rubbed it, and I see it's fuel oil. Then I lift my foot and I've got a whole, like a big glob of fuel oil. I was fed up with scrubbing it off later.
Crimean bloggers are posting videos of unusually empty beaches in Crimea. This season also risks being a failure. With all the wartime attractions awaiting tourists, the already high prices on the peninsula have risen by 20%. And that's not the limit. Following the fuel shortage, Crimea may face a food shortage. But those aren't all the surprises. As the Insider found out, the occupation authorities of Sevastopol are preparing restrictions that will effectively ban boat trips from Balaclava to Cape Aya for owners of skiffs, excursion boats, and small vessels. It's all because Putin's friends, the Rotenbergs, have planned in the bay large-scale construction of luxury apartments with a yacht marina. And this means that at least 125 people who for years earned a living on this stretch of coast with boat trips will be left without work.
Putin and Lukashenko have begun openly threatening Armenia that Russia could launch a new special military operation there. On Sunday, June 7th, key parliamentary elections will be held in the country, which will determine the pro-European or pro-Russian future development of the Caucasian state.
While Armenia prepares for the parliamentary elections scheduled for Sunday, June 7th, the Kremlin, in the person of Putin, is preparing large-scale provocations in the country and threatening Nikol Pashinyan with serious consequences if his people make what Moscow considers the wrong choice, specifically moving towards European integration instead of closer ties with the Russian Federation.
Therefore, we will be forced to somewhere, not just somewhere, but by and large, practically all of our work, in this case with Armenia in the economic sphere concerning integration processes, to shut down.
Alexander Lukashenko is also chiming in. The Belarusian dictator is threatening Armenians in almost plain language. Supposedly, if pro-European parties win a majority in the parliamentary elections and the country tries to join the European Union, the fate of Ukraine awaits it, specifically the deployment of Russian troops.
Armenians need to be very careful, and the people, God forbid, should not repeat what happened in Ukraine. Ukraine started exactly like that. You remember that? So that they, the Armenians, who have just emerged from one war, do not end up in a difficult situation in this regard. There's no need to rush. You just need to think. You have to be wise people.
However, Armenia has long since thought it all through. After the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, in which Russia effectively distanced itself from what was happening, the latter almost lost its military and political influence in Armenia.
Probably only the lazy haven't said that these elections will determine Armenia's future geopolitical choice, which direction to move in. But in principle, in terms of the intensity of passions, this is truly probably since the Velvet Revolution, which brought Nikol Pashinyan to power, probably the most active elections. Even the elections after 2020 and 2021, after the 44-day war, they weren't so vivid and didn't attract as much attention as the current ones.
Putin himself understands this perfectly, so by hook or by crook he is trying to return Armenia, as he likes to put it, to its native Russian harbor.
Everything that is good for Armenians is acceptable and good for Russia. Please do as you see fit, taking into careful consideration the best interests and well-being of the Armenian people as a whole.
At the same time, Moscow is putting economic pressure on Armenia. This is the last lever in the hands of the Russian dictator. The Russian Federation's share in Armenia's trade turnover is 36%. Moscow is simultaneously the country's main exporter and importer. At prices many times lower than market rates, goods from Russia arrive on preferential terms. Flour, grain, fertilizers, diesel fuel, and gasoline. The railways in the Republic are under concession to the Russian monopolist RZD. But perhaps the Kremlin's strongest argument, the price of gas. Lukashenko did not forget to remind Pashinyan about it.
Are you talking about money? Today, Russia sells duty-free natural gas to Armenia, I might be wrong, $150 to $160 per 1,000 cubic meters. And in the European Union, natural gas is $550 to $650 per 1,000, 6 times more expensive. That's just natural gas. I'm not talking about anything else. what a benefit that is. If we're talking about money,
Pro-Russian politicians in Armenia are sounding the alarm. In their view, if the country starts toward European integration, it will lead to a new war, far bloodier than all the previous ones. And not only on the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh.
This entire conflict between the West and Russia, the current leadership of Armenia, has already brought everything onto Armenian territory.
But most of Armenian society is still on the side of a pro-Western course, analysts state. Friendship with Putin promises the country nothing but new sanctions, restrictions, and isolation.
Of course, there will be a crisis as it is truly multi-component, and it has not only an economic or energy basis, but also a basis in the field of security. Since Russia can, on the one hand, provide Armenia with a security umbrella or not provide it, as we have seen, but it can also become a source of threat itself. And we have seen this in the example of other countries.
But Nikol Pashinyan is extremely cunning. According to political scientists, he will try to sit on two chairs at once. On the one hand, to maintain more or less friendly relations with the Kremlin, and on the other, through the newly elected parliament, to move the country toward Europe.
Nikol Pashinyan, the government has never spoken about its goal of leaving the EAEU. They are taking full advantage of membership in this organization, while in parallel trying to find some alternatives for the future. And we fully understand that even in a purely hypothetical situation, membership in the European Union is realistically something that would take 10 to 20 years to achieve. That is, it's not 2 years for the promised visa-free travel. This is a long period of time during which we understand that much can change in Russia as well.
Putin himself understands this perfectly. So, unlike Lukashenko, he is extremely modest in his criticism of Armenia. After all, we shouldn't forget that besides exports, Russia also imports a lot from the neighboring country. So, like it or not, the man in the bunker will still have to do business with Pashinyan and the new Armenian parliament.
The Russian and Armenian people are linked by bonds of friendship, without any exaggeration, and bonds of special relations over centuries.
Killers as deputies. The Kremlin continues its victory-obsessed personnel policy and leads selected heroes of the SVO to power. One such soldier, accused of shooting a resident of Bucha, will run for the State Duma from United Russia. We'll talk more about the Kremlin's policy and the employment of war criminals. And don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the Ukraine Today YouTube channel. This is Nursultan Musagaliyev. At the start of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, he commanded a reconnaissance platoon of the 104th Air Assault Regiment of the 76th VDV Division, which operated in the Bucha district. He is responsible for the torture and murder of at least one civilian in Bucha.
The commander of the Russian reconnaissance platoon ordered his subordinates to kidnap a 29-year-old local resident who was driving through an enemy checkpoint. The victim was taken to a forest near the village of Dmitrivka, where he was brutally tortured for a long time, and then, on Musagaliyev's orders, shot, and his body was left at the murder scene.
To Ukraine, Musagaliyev is a war criminal, but in Russia he is a hero, and a decorated one at that. He also holds 3 orders of courage and a medal for services to the fatherland. But the reverence for this hero wasn't limited to just awards. After demobilization, he joined the Time of Heroes program created at Putin's behest. This marked a new milestone in the soldier's career. Now he is a politician.
It must be understood that this is purely a kind of facade, because these veterans won't play any real role. It's purely PR, so some strange old man sits next to Putin, along with some strange heroes of the special military operation. In some number, a very small one, they must be present in various places, including the State Duma. There are a few deputy governors and others like that.
In 2025, Musagaliyev became the acting deputy minister of information policy for the Orenburg region and later headed an entire district. But his career isn't standing still, and now Musagaliyev is a candidate for the State Duma from Putin's United Russia party. But this specific case of PR has another goal: to mask the trail of the Bucha butcher with political virtue.
Because Bucha is a very sensitive topic for the Kremlin. And if we look at how many criminal cases were opened for publications about the events in Bucha, will only confirm that it's indeed very painful. Actually, that's exactly why a war criminal who participated in this crime could very well end up in the State Duma.
The case of bringing soldiers who operated in the Kyiv region in February and March of 22 into politics is not unique. Colonel Sergei Karasev also entered politics. At the time of the invasion, he was the commander of the 31st Air Assault Brigade of the Russian Airborne Forces. In Ukraine, he is a war criminal.
March 25th, 2022. The commander, along with Russian servicemen, was going through apartments. In one of the apartments, the occupiers found a local resident. Due to the man's lack of documents, the commander took him behind the house to a playground and shot the victim in the head with an automatic weapon.
In January 26, Karasyov becomes the deputy mayor of Samara. This is far from the first time they've been given a government post. This is happening under Putin's mentioned program, Time of Heroes.
Time of Heroes sounds just a little bit pretentious, but on the other hand, it really does reflect the situation of today. Actually, when you think about it, the phrase fits our current reality quite well. There are many here who are truly, really heroes of the Russian Federation.
And let's not forget that Putin sees talent in these warriors.
Well, we need to support them. We must look for the talented ones. There are many talented people there. I meet with them, believe me. Talented, modern, clear-thinking people. We need to look for them, find them, and help.
Among such talents is Major General Alexander Shuvaev, who took part in the war against Ukraine. He rose from the ranks to become a regional head, replacing Vyacheslav Gladkov as governor of the Belgorod region. But let's get back to the Duma elections. According to estimates, 478 war veterans ran in the United Russia primaries. 43 of them won. Under internal party rules, status as a participant in the so-called SVO automatically adds 25% of the votes to a candidate. In this way, the Kremlin wants to refresh the Duma and get some PR.
Putin decides, or Putin, maybe Kirienko, the Internal Policy Department decides to seriously refresh the deputy lineup. Much is written about this. And essentially, as part of this refresh, a certain number of SVO veterans are included for the optics. Again, it's not exactly a mass invasion of war criminals into the Duma. No, it's an isolated story that will simply be highlighted as much as possible through the mass media.
But only those who have been vetted inside and out, and who are at least minimally trusted and can be controlled, are promoted into politics.
Absolutely no one, not a single person, feels safe at all today.
In reality, the Kremlin is afraid of most of the warriors and tries to appease them with other methods. And those few dozen officials in uniform are just for show.
These new veterans pose a huge danger and a huge threat to the regime. And they're trying to appease them somehow, including through all sorts of programs.